Welcome to Curious Confessions, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Before we unravel tonight's eerie encounter, it would mean a lot to me if you light up that like button and subscribe. Because in this place, curiosity isn't just encouraged, it's essential. Ready to uncover the next confession? Let's begin. I had heard a knock on the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I looked around. Nothing. Then I looked down and saw it. Lying there on the doorstep was an old cell phone with a cracked screen. I picked it up and clicked the home button. It opened without a passcode, revealing a home screen with only one app. "Rebecca," I called out to my 18-year-old daughter as I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me. "You know anything about the cell phone I just found on the doorstep?" "On the doorstep," she called back from the living room, likely scrolling away on her own phone. "Yeah, with a big crack in it." "Nope. I guess I'll just throw it out then." "Wait, I want to see." She cried out, her curiosity piqued as she made her way over to the kitchen. I held it up for her to see. Looks old, like from when you and Mom were growing up." "When your mom and I were growing up, there were no cell phones, Becca." "Sounds boring." "Yeah, it was. Perfectly boring, in the best way possible. Now look at what's become of the world." Yeah, let me see it," she said, snatching the old cracked cell phone out my hand. "What's the passcode?" "There isn't one." She opened it. "Just one app? This phone is so mid." "Mid?" I asked, unfamiliar with her Gen Z slang. "It means like mediocre, Dad. Where'd you find this thing anyway?" "I told you, on the doorstep. Someone knocked and ran away." "So it's some sort of prank?" "If it is, it's a pretty mid-prank," I replied, giving her the same smug look I always did when I landed a dad joke. Your jokes are not funny, Dad. Anyways, I'm gonna see what's in the app," Rebecca said as she scurried off back to the living room and proceeded to scroll away on the cracked old phone. "Cool, let me know what you find, Becca," I said casually, as I sat back down at the dinner table and continued reading my newspaper. An hour or so later, my wife Erica returned home from work, and we had dinner. "Rebecca, it's dinner time," Erica called out from the kitchen, but my daughter didn't reply. "Becca," I added. But again, Rebecca ignored us. My wife and I both looked at each other and rolled our eyes. "Your loss. Food'll be cold again," Erica said, referring to the countless other times our social media-obsessed teen had forgone dinner so long that the meal had become cold. "Kids," I muttered under my breath. "So how was work, honey?" A few hours later, my wife and I decided to go upstairs for the night, and, seeing that Rebecca was still scrolling away on the couch, reminded her that her dinner was on the table. Once again, our daughter just ignored us as she continued to scroll away on her phone. Something that, after raising an 18-year-old daughter, I was very used to. But this time something was different. This time she was scrolling on a different phone. The old cracked phone I had found on the doorstep, to be precise. She's still using that old thing. Wonder what app was on there. Must be some game or social media thing, I thought to myself. "Just remember to turn the lights out before you go to bed, Becca," my wife called down before we retired to our bedroom, to no reply. But the next morning, not only did we find the lights on, but we also found Rebecca still sitting there. Sure enough, scrolling away on the old cracked phone. "Rebecca," my wife called out. "Did you even sleep last night?" "Yeah, Becca, you really shouldn't be pulling all-nighters like that," I added as I went to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. But before I could make it that far, something caught my eye on the kitchen table. To my disbelief, there was Rebecca's dinner, still sitting there, completely untouched. That's when I knew that something was very wrong. By the time my wife and I were able to pry the old cracked cell phone out of our daughter's hands, Rebecca had gone into a sudden fit of rage. "Give it back," she screamed, her eyes cold and lifeless. I tossed the phone to Erica behind me while I stood between her and our daughter. I said, "Give it back," Rebecca screamed again in a threatening fashion. "Becca, what's gotten into you? It's just an old phone, and a cracked one at that," I began. But before I could continue, my innocent daughter, who had never laid a finger on a soul her entire life, suddenly lunged at me, swung her arm, and ran her nails across my face, tearing the flesh from my skin and causing blood to pour down my neck. "Rebecca!" I yelled, raising my voice. But it was too late. She had already hopped over me and chased my wife into the kitchen. When I finally caught up to her at the entrance to the kitchen, I saw my daughter standing there with a steak knife on one side of the kitchen table, while my wife stood on the other, shaking in fear as she held the old cracked phone in her hand. "What was on that app?" I asked hypothetically out loud, realizing that whatever my daughter had discovered on the phone must have been the cause of her 14-hour doom scroll and subsequent fit of rage. But Erica must have taken me literally, immediately opening the phone and going to the app. I saw a perplexed look wash over my wife's face as she took her finger, placed it on the phone's cracked surface, and started to scroll. "No! Erica, stop!" I cried out as I ran over to her and ripped the phone from her hand. But before I could even process what had happened, I heard the steak knife that my daughter was holding fall to the kitchen floor before she too collapsed to the ground. "Becca," I asked, confused by her sudden change of disposition, but at the same time relieved that her fit of rage had ceased. That's when I heard a growl behind me, as my daughter's rage had somehow shifted to my wife, and Erica picked up the knife from the floor. "Give it back," my wife screamed, her eyes now cold and lifeless. I looked down at my daughter, who looked as if she had just awoken from a trance. That's when I realized that whatever curse had been bestowed upon the old cracked phone's app seemed to only affect the last person who used it. I took my dazed daughter by the hand and led her out of the kitchen, out of the house, and to the driveway as my wife followed, still wielding the knife. "Get in," I insisted as I opened my car door, and Rebecca hopped inside before I used my key fob to lock her inside. "Give me the phone," my wife cried from behind me as she swung the knife at me. I stepped aside and watched its blade pierce the hood of my car. I thought to call out my wife's name in an attempt to snap her out of it, but immediately realizing that there was only one way to snap her out of her trance. As she struggled to pull the blade out of the car, I seized the opportunity to run back in the house and turn on the sink in the first-floor bathroom. Eventually, my wife came back inside looking for me and, sure enough, headed for the source of the running water. And when she stepped inside, I hopped out from behind the kitchen island, slamming the door behind her, before dragging a nearby bookshelf against the door and reinforcing it with a few other heavy objects. "Give me the phone," I heard her cry out from inside the bathroom as I looked at the old cracked cell phone that I was still gripping in my hand and knew what I had to do. 30 minutes later, the deed was done. The old cracked cell phone, left on a random neighbor's doorstep in the next town over, where I hoped no one would recognize me. When I got back to the car, my daughter was just sitting there in the passenger seat, still traumatized and speechless from what she had just gone through. We drove home in silence, and when we finally got back, we waited by the barricaded bathroom door as my wife continued to scream, and waited until eventually she stopped. I slid the heavy objects and bookshelf aside and opened the bathroom door to find Erica just standing there, as if waking from a bad dream, the same exhausted expression on her face that I'd seen previously on my daughter. It had worked. My wife was no longer possessed by the vile device. Erica walked over and hugged me. I looked over at my daughter. She smiled. I smiled back. In that moment, two things became clear. 1. Someone else had been possessed by the phone prior to leaving it on my doorstep. 2. Someone new was possessed by it now. But all that mattered to me in that moment was that my family was okay. I wish I could say that after the dust settled, my daughter swore off cell phones, social media, and apps altogether. But the truth is, it only took a day before she was back to doom scrolling on her own phone. Now every time she does, and her dinner gets cold, I can't help but fear that she's been possessed again. But then I realize she's just a teenager. The poster read, "Happiness, sold in glass jars, call today." And underneath the text was a phone number. I was walking home from a long, exhausting day of work when I caught a glimpse of the paper stapled on an old telephone pole. I took a picture of it thinking it was amusing. I was going to show my wife once I got to our apartment, but I was caught up with chores and forgot about it. Dinner, dishes, laundry, packing a snack for our daughter, putting her to bed, then putting her toys away that she'd left out in the living room. Every night, it was the exact same routine. The next day, I awoke sleeping back to back with my wife. I always had to get up earlier than she did for my job, so I quietly got ready for the day and headed out the door. At work, I was updating the company's latest expense report. Most days were similar to this one. They were basically paying me to stare at a computer for 9 hours a day and input a couple numbers into a spreadsheet. I finished my work very quickly, so I decided to head out of the office early. It also helped that it was a Friday, and a lot of people leave early at the end of the week. On my walk back, I was thinking of what my life had become. I did this often. I always dreamed of traveling when I was younger. I wanted to drive across the country or solo backpack across Europe. Then I met Kelsey. Don't get me wrong, I loved Kelsey. I mean, I still do. We just don't have that spark anymore. When you meet someone and get in a relationship, whether it's meant to be or not, some of your personal life plans have to be put on hold. And then that relationship turns to marriage, and then you have a baby. Then you have to enroll your daughter in a preschool. Then you have to get a better paying job and work more hours and blah blah blah. I'm not trying to throw a pity party for myself. I'm just saying I wasn't exactly content with where I was in my life. I wouldn't have referred to myself as a happy person. As I took the same route home that I did every day to work and back, I walked by the same poster I had passed the day before. I don't know why, I really don't, but I decided to call the number. I figured it would be some joke. Maybe someone just picks up and says, "I love you," on the other end and hangs up. Or maybe it's a line to a sex worker. I had no idea what to expect. I called. It only rang once before someone picked up. "Hello?" a woman said. Hi. I'm calling about your poster, your ad." "Oh, awesome," she said calmly. "When do you want to pick it up?" "Pick what up?" "The jar," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Oh, of course. I realized then that I had left work early without telling Kelsey, so I could just go pick it up now and she'd be none the wiser. "What exactly is it that you're selling?" "I just told you. It's happiness, in a glass jar, like the poster said. Happiness keeps best in glass jars. They're more durable than, say, a plastic bag." Okay. Should we meet somewhere?" "For sure. I don't want you to end up being a creep or something, so let's go to a public place." The public place we decided on was a Starbucks parking lot a little over a mile from me. Now, I didn't think I was really going to be buying a jar of happiness or whatever. I was 99% sure she was going to sell me drugs. Maybe heroin would be in the jar. I remember thinking, oh no, happiness is probably a nickname for some street drug, and I'm going to a drug deal. What if she's a cop? Am I going to be arrested? But something inside me told me to keep walking, and so I did. I stood outside and texted her. "Me, I'm here." Her, "Cool, be there in a sec." Me, "What are you driving?" Her, silver Camry. And as her final text came through, I saw her car pull in. She took a spot not too far from where I stood. I could see there was no one else in the car, which put my kidnapping fear to rest. She opened her door and stood on the pavement, looking around until her eyes met mine. I gave her a little nod of acknowledgement. She simply responded by waving her hand, gesturing for me to come over to her car, so I did. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with curly golden hair. Her skin was pale and contrasted with the all-black outfit she was wearing. I thought she looked like Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz had put on the Wicked Witch's clothes. "Nice day out," she said as a greeting. "Oh, yeah, it is. Hadn't really paid attention to it." "You were the one that called about the jar, right?" "Yeah, that was me." "Cool. Well, here you go." She handed me a very small glass mason jar. It couldn't have been more than 2 inches tall. Inside of it was a light. Not a light bulb, just light. It was like someone bottled up sunshine. It glowed even in the mid-afternoon daylight. It looked like a tiny sun, or a tiny universe existing in this little crystal-walled home. I was admiring it with no attempt to hide the awe on my face. Pretty rad, isn't it? What? What is it? You've asked that like 3 different times, I think. My answer is still the same. It is happiness. Happiness in a glass jar. What do I do with it? Keep it, she said simply. If you have any problems, shoot me a text. She started to get into her car. Wait, I said. I thought you were selling this. How much is it? Don't worry, man, she said with a smile. You'll pay. She closed her door, and I stepped out of her way as she backed up, then drove off. What the hell had just happened? What was I holding? I looked down at the jar again. Its radiance was simply mesmerizing. I put it in my pocket and could see its glow slightly through my pants. I began to walk home. What was just a nice, sunny day quickly changed into a rainy one with clouds wrapping the sky. It was not forecasted that it would rain, or else I would have ridden the bus or subway to work that day. I jogged home, trying not to get too drenched. I finally found shelter once I made it to my apartment building. I walked up to my door and found that my key wasn't on my key ring anymore. Shit, I can't believe I lost it again, I thought. I knocked on the door and said in a somewhat loud voice, "Hey babe, it's me. I don't know what happened to my key." I heard the door being unlocked from the other side. When the door opened, I was greeted by a large, heavy-set man with greasy hair and unkempt goatee. He said, "I think you got the wrong door, bud." "Oh," I said, disoriented. "My bad, sorry. Have a good one." He let out a chuckle as he closed the door. "Apartment number 33. I know that was my apartment. I know it was. I'd been in apartment 33 for 5 years now, but that was not my apartment. From what I could see inside, all the furniture was different. It was painted a different color. It was all wrong. I felt like I'd hit my head and was drugged. In that moment, nothing made sense. I pulled out my phone to call Kelsey so she could calm me down and tell me I just got confused for a second. But her contact wasn't in my phone. In fact, nothing was in my phone. I had no messages with her, no previous calls, no pictures. It was like my phone reset to its factory settings. Did that girl somehow switch my phone out when I wasn't looking? I would have just dialed Kelsey's number manually, but I couldn't quite remember it. I had known it by heart before, but not anymore. I needed to get back to the office. I had all my contacts backed up on my work computer. Since it was still raining, I hopped on the bus, which had a stop right in front of the apartment complex. I rode downtown toward my office, the whole time staring at my wet shoes, wondering what the hell was going on. We have a keycard access to our building, so only authorized personnel can get inside. I always keep my access card in my wallet, always. But, surprise, surprise, it wasn't there. I buzzed into the speaker we had for guests with appointments, or employees as a backup in case anyone lost or forgot their card. BZ. Hey, this is Tim. I must have lost my card. My employee number is... I stopped as I drew a blank. A voice came through the speaker. Tim, you got cut out. What's your employee number? I can't remember. That's fine. Just tell me your full name and department. Finance. I'm in finance. My full name is Tim Brooks. One sec. About 30 seconds later, the man spoke to me again. We don't have a Tim Brooks working in this building. Did you have an appointment with someone? I backed up in surprise, almost tripping on my own feet. I had just been in that office an hour or two ago. What was happening to me? I felt like I was getting Alzheimer's, but going through every stage in one day. I stared at my hands, unsure if I was in the right body. I felt like the world around me was disintegrating. I wasn't in control. I was merely sitting inside somebody else's head, watching the world through their eyes. Just then, I got a text. I recognized the number immediately. It was that girl, the one who gave me the jar. I had forgotten all about it until I saw her text. Hey, how's it going? I looked at my phone, dumbfounded. It made me angry she was so nonchalant about this. She knew what was going on. She had done this somehow. Me. What the hell did you do to me? Her. The worst is yet to come. I was astronomically close to just chucking my phone as far as I could in frustration. I took the jar out of my pocket. It looked unchanged, still glowing just as bright. What the fuck did you do? I yelled at the jar, realizing I probably looked like a lunatic. As I stared at its glistening glass, I realized something. I didn't know what my wife's face looked like anymore. I knew her name. Well, I know it started with a K, or maybe a C. I couldn't picture her in my mind. I knew I had a wife. I knew I did. Yes, because I had a daughter. I had a wife and a daughter. I just couldn't remember their faces then, or their names, or their birthdays, or any memories I had with them. I know they existed. They did exist. I had just seen them that morning, right? I couldn't remember how she looked, or what she smelled like. What was our first date? We had a wedding, right? What about our first kiss? Or my daughter? Or was it my son? Maybe I didn't even have a kid. But my wife or girlfriend, she was real. I knew she was. The thought was tearing me apart. I couldn't see her in my head. I couldn't recall a single fact about her. I was standing outside of the same building, but I was unsure why I was. Did I work there? I must work somewhere. The rain was accompanied by a chilly wind now. It was whipping at my face, making my nose and cheeks sting. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with her. I wanted to be warm. I wanted to go into a shitty office job that kept a roof over my head. I wanted it all. I was soaking wet. I was miserable. I couldn't remember my parents or my childhood. Did I even have any friends? Why was I in the rain? I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the jar. The only memory of my entire life I could concretely remember was that girl giving it to me, telling me it was happiness. It did not bring happiness. It brought pain. It brought suffering. I was more miserable in that moment than I'd ever been. My phone buzzed. "Break the jar, Tim." I looked at my other hand. With the setting sun and the rainy sky, I swear the jar glowed brighter than any streetlight near me. I didn't break it because I was following her instruction. I broke it because I was angry. I broke it because I was upset. I needed a release. I raised my arm above my head and brought it down with one swift motion, shattering the jar on the concrete beneath my feet. That dark, chilly air accompanying the rain spread away like it was the shockwave of a bomb going off, and I was at the epicenter. I saw the warm, yellow light from inside the jar spread rapidly across the ground and ascend into the sky. It was as if I was watching the beginnings of the universe being created, like God had just snapped his fingers and said, "Let there be light." I was engulfed in it. I I could no longer see street or rain or anything dark. I felt like I was plummeting into a star going faster than the speed of light. It felt like sitting in front of a fire on a cold winter's night. But that warmth was covering every inch by body. And then I blinked. Immediately I could feel the sheets beneath me, and my back barely touching my wife's. I was staring out the window. The morning light drenched through the glass and gleamed on my face. I stood from bed and grabbed my phone. It was Friday morning. I had one text: "Let me know if you ever need another jar." I called in sick to work. I snuck into my daughter's room and greeted her with a kiss and told her she didn't have to go to preschool today. We were going to have a family day. She smiled and stretched out her arms with a yawn before curling up and falling back asleep. I got back in bed and squeezed my wife tightly. I didn't let go for hours. Our daughter came into our room and woke us up eventually. She was jumping on the bed and shouting for us to wake up. Yesterday, I may have found that annoying. Yesterday, I may have found a lot of things annoying or monotonous or dull. But not today. Today, I pulled her under the covers in between me and Kelsey. Today was going to be a good day. Today, I was happy. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way, I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. Story 1. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time, they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff, and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing, and they don't wander far. But I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair, like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched that area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could possibly have gone, because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. Story 2. A few times I've been out on my own, searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me straight up cliffs, not hills, not even rock faces. Straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine has led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. Story 3. One particularly sad case involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident, but I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what had happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbroken wail I've ever heard. It was like her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her had died with her daughter. I heard from another SAR officer that she killed herself a few weeks after it happened. She couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. Story 4. I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip when he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevasse with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how he'd been doing fine, and when he'd gotten to the top, a man had been there. He said the guy had no climbing equipment, and he was wearing a parka and ski pants. He walked up to the guy, and when the guy turned around, he said he had no face. It was just blank. He freaked out and ended up trying to get off the mountain too fast, which is why he'd fallen. He said he could hear the guy all night, climbing down the mountain and letting out these horrible muffled screams. That story bothered the hell out of me. I'm glad I wasn't there to hear it. Story 5. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curled up under a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking us why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me, and her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human could open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right in my ear, and I just about jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left the area that night. Story 6. This is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken, regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't even seem weird anymore. On just about every case where we're really far into the wilderness, I'm talking 30 or 40 miles, at some point we'll find a staircase in the middle of the woods. It's almost like if you took the stairs in your house, cut them out, and put them in the forest. I asked about it the first time I saw some, and the other officer just told me not to worry about it, that it was normal. Everyone I asked said the same thing. I wanted to go check them out, but I was told, very emphatically, that I should never go near any of them. I just sort of ignore them now when I run into them, because it happens so frequently. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way, I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. Story 1. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire. You wouldn't believe how often this happens, mostly drunk kids. Get bitten, or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently, he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location, and we come right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up into the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. But there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we'd found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That, and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there as some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. Story 2. Missing kids are the most heartbreaking. Doesn't matter what circumstances they go missing under. It's never easy. And we always dread the ones we find deceased. It's not common, but it does happen. David Paulides talks a lot about kids SR teams find in places they shouldn't be, or couldn't be. I can honestly say I've heard about this kind of thing happening more than I've seen it, but I'll share one of the ones that I think about a lot, that I witnessed personally. A mother and her 3 kids were out for a picnic in an area of the park that has a small lake. One is 6, one is 5, and the other is about 3. She's watching them all really closely, and according to her, she never lets them out of her sight at any time. She never saw anyone else in the area either, which is important. She packs their stuff up, and they start to head back to the parking area. Now, this lake is only about 2 miles into the woods, and it's on a very clearly established trail. It's almost impossible to get lost getting from the parking area to it, unless you're deliberately going off the path like an imbecile. Her kids are walking in front of her when she hears what sounds like someone coming up the path behind her. She turns around, and in the 4 or so seconds she's not looking, her 5-year-old son vanishes. She figures he stepped off the trail to pee or something, and she asks her other 2 where he went. They both tell her that a big man with a scary face came out of the woods next to them, took the kid's hand, and led him into the trees. The 2 remaining kids don't seem upset. In fact, she says later that it seems like they've been drugged. They're sort of spacey and fuzzy. So of course, she freaks out, starts looking frantically in the area for her kid. She's screaming his name, and she says at one point she thinks she heard him answer her. Now obviously she can't go blindly running into the woods. She's got the other 2 kids, so she calls the police and they send us out immediately. We respond and we start the search for him. Over the course of this search, which spans miles, we never find a single trace of the kid. Canines can't pick up any scent. We don't find any clothing or broken bushes or literally anything that would signify a child being there. Of course, there's suspicion about the mother for a while, but it's pretty clear that she's completely destroyed by the whole thing. We looked for this kid for weeks, with a lot of volunteer help. But eventually, the search peters out, and we have to move on. The volunteers keep searching though, and one day we get a call on the radio letting us know that a body has been found and needs to be recovered. They tell us the location, and none of us can believe it. We figure it has to be a different kid. But we go out there, about 15 miles from the site where he vanished, and sure enough, we find the body of the kid we've been looking for. I have been trying to figure out how this kid got where he did ever since we found him, and I've never come up with an answer. A volunteer just happened to be in the area because he figured he might as well look in places no one else would think to on the off chance the body had been dumped. He comes to the base of a tall, rocky slope, and halfway up, he sees something. He looks through his binoculars, and sure enough, it's the body of a little boy, stuffed in a little opening in the rock. He recognizes the color of the kid's shirt, so he knows right away that it's the missing boy. That's when he calls it in, and we're dispatched. It took us almost an hour to get his body down, and none of us could believe what we were seeing. Not only was this kid 15 miles from where he'd started, there was no possible way he could have gotten up there on his own. This slope is treacherous, and it's hard even for us with our climbing gear. A 5-year-old boy had no way of getting up there, of that I'm certain. Not only that, but the kid doesn't have a scratch on him. His shoes are gone, but his feet aren't damaged or dirty. So it wasn't as if an animal dragged him up there. And from what we can tell, he hasn't been dead that long. He'd been out there over a month by that point, and it looked like he'd only been dead for, at most, a day or 2. The whole thing was unbelievably strange, and was one of the most disconcerting calls I've ever been on. We found out later that the coroner determined the kid had died from exposure. He'd frozen to death, probably late at night 2 days before we found him. There were no suspects, and no answers. To date, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Story 3. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area and she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase, in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase, with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house, where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. "Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them." I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm, hard. "I wouldn't do that," she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. "You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them." I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. "It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them." When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. Story 4. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going that far out onto the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year, and we knew it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree, in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard, or spend any amount of time on a mountain, will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches. It happens most with fir trees, because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of a tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the welcome center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are. But every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person doesn't read them or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position, like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down, in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. Story 5. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the Goatman while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the Goatman. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs, to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her, and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially, what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow, meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm gonna go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow, meow, in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the welcome center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird. Can someone help me? I'm Vivi. I'm 19 years old, and I'm trying to escape my town of New Haven. If any kids in New Haven happen to see this, can you let me know? I'll go over the details at the bottom of this post, but I want to clarify that I'm hiding behind the wall near the town exit. If you are an adult and come near me, I will shoot you. I'll start from the beginning. 2 weeks ago, I was living in an apocalyptic world. Ren tasted like chicken. I was told to douse him in BBQ sauce, which made him easier to swallow, but he was still too dry, stringy, and stuck in my teeth. This is the lifestyle I grew up with. I've only ever known this way of living and surviving. Father told us to treat Ren like food, to detach ourselves completely. But I couldn't let go of 18 years with him just like that. I grew up with Ren, freckled cheeks and lopsided smiles. Ren. We shared bunk beds, and he used to tell me scary stories to help me sleep. As we grew up together, we became closer, and he became the joker of our little group. When morale was low, he was always there to crack a joke and maintain a wide smile, despite being terrified himself. I admired his ability to wear a mask and pretend everything was okay, even when we sacrificed our friends. The night prior to his death, Ren climbed into my bed and told me his theories about his parents. He was positive they were still alive, and he was going to find them. When it was safe to go back to the surface, that was. Ren didn't remember a lot about his childhood, but he did know his parents were in the medical field. I found myself wearing his threaded jacket, the one he insisted on me keeping if he was ever chosen. He loved that jacket. Apparently, his 3-year-old self was wrapped up in it when Father found him. Now, Ren was stuck at the back of my throat. I kept chewing, but the more I swallowed, the sicker I felt. I wasn't even hungry, but Father insisted. If we were going to give our thanks for him keeping us safe and away from the surface, we had to obey every order Father gave us. Ren told me not to be upset and not to miss him. I tried not to. Father always said we had to detach ourselves from the food. That was the only way we were going to enjoy it. But I did miss Ren. The empty spot next to me felt cavernous and hollow. I missed his head on my shoulder. I missed late-night talks with him, and confessing I maybe had a crush on him at the age of 9. He laughed and said, "Maybe when we're old enough, you can ask me to marry you." I don't think even he realized how powerful his words were. That I would marry him in a heartbeat if we were just normal kids in a normal world. It wasn't fair that I missed Ren as much as I did. I spat him out into my bowl, draining the rest of my water. "Gross," Jack grumbled from across the table. I shot him a glare, and he stuck out his tongue. Jack was the oldest among us, but you wouldn't think so by looking at him. Small and scrawny, with little meat on him, Jack was the definition of a squirt. Illuminated by the flickering candlelight, the others were eating, their faces cast in an eerie glow as they listened to Father's stories. I knew them all by heart. Father had been recounting the same tales since I was a little kid. When we were 3 years old, the world ended in what was called the disaster, a terrifying phenomenon that swept across the planet, turning adults into feral predators of their own children. Nobody knew how it happened. Some people hypothesized it was bioterrorism, while others insisted it was natural human evolution. All living things consumed their young, and now it was humanity's turn. According to Father, who vividly described the horrific experience of devouring his own son, it was a thirst unlike anything he had ever felt before, something he couldn't control or suppress. It burned right through logic and love, transforming every adult, every parent, into a cold-blooded, flesh-eating monster. Not a zombie, Father made sure to add. Zombies are mindless corpses brought back to life. They are fictional monsters. This was different. The ones affected did not lose their minds. They lost their humanity. Father averted his gaze from us. When I became afflicted with this phenomenon, my son was like nicotine, stronger than any black market drug. He cleared his throat. There was no right or wrong, no morals left in me. I was an animal when I killed and skinned him, cooking him into a hot stew. Father's smile was sickly. I didn't feel regret or pain. I wanted more. I wanted to feast on him until my stomach was bulging. His voice splintered apart. I killed and ate my son, and I didn't even care. I don't remember my son's name. Whatever this thing was, it took it away. It took away my memories of him, my love for him, my want to protect him, and turned me into a loveless monster. Father sighed. But it didn't end there. When it became known that children's flesh wasn't just like a drug to adults, but also granted youth and immortality when eaten, the planet fell into chaos. World leaders came apart first. Initially, a treaty was made among adults unaffected by the phenomenon. The Children's Association was born, created to protect and save kids from the feral adults. However, there was no Children's Association. Instead of trying to save kids, the governments were consuming them. Older kids who survived were taken in and brainwashed, converted into bounty hunters, and tasked with hunting us down. Stray kids in hiding who managed to survive being eaten were given a nickname: Threads. Apparently, when eaten, our flesh was stringy and thread-like. Father hid underground from the war going on between surviving older children who fought back and the feral adults hunting them down like animals. He took a group of young kids with him. There were 15 of us, now 6. I didn't remember much about my life before the disaster, but I did know I had a mother and father. One day, they walked out the door and left me watching cartoons. Mom told me she was going to be right back. Halfway through an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, Father wrapped his arms around me and carried me from my home to safety. Father did admit his original intention was to eat us. He never tried to sugarcoat his own craving for flesh, and that he too was just as monstrous as the adults hunting us down. But the longer he stayed isolated from the surface, Father named each of us. At first, it was to give us an identity, so he'd feel less guilty about killing and eating us. Once he'd named us, however, Father had to become a real parent to avoid us getting caught, which meant feeding and clothing us, singing lullabies, and spending hours struggling to get us to go to sleep. I guess fatherhood began to hit him. It's not like he wanted it, but he'd grown maternal towards us. He started to feel human again, growing attached to his food. As we grew up, he taught us everything we needed to know, basic academics, along with life skills like cooking food and typing. But that didn't stop his insatiable hunger. He promised to keep us safe from the adults for one small favor. Ren was the last to continue our favor. He was almost 6 months old, refrigerated bloody chunks piled in my bowl. Maybe that was why I felt so sick and couldn't eat. Father was getting hungry for fresh meat again. Part of me thought maybe his hunger had gone away. I did see him eating rice more often. But after he ravaged his way through Ren, I guessed wrong. When Father got to his feet, abruptly abandoning his latest story, the others went silent. Jack and Elsa were talking about a book they were reading, but once Father made it obvious he was reaching for the playing cards on the small table by the door, the two of them drifted off, their eyes going wide. Alia and Phoebe were already waiting for it. Neither of them had spoken all day, both of them ignoring their food. When Phoebe started crying, I wanted to comfort her. But what could I say? I didn't want to be sacrificed either. Phoebe, Father's voice was a warning. Be quiet. I had always seen Father more as a shadow, less of a human. I never really saw much of a face or an identity, just an outline of a person. In this case, I was happy I couldn't see the grinning smile spreading across his lips, only the slight contortions in his jaw. The room suddenly felt too small, claustrophobic, like it was going to swallow me up. Our home had always been small, a singular rectangular-shaped bunker underground. This place was cramped, with concrete walls absorbing the faded light from bare bulbs hanging from the low ceiling. The air was always damp and made my skin feel gross, and it always smelled like sulfur. Father was never specific about what it was or how he had obtained it. He just said it was our home. The bunker was divided into 2 cramped sections, a communal area where we ate and did daily activities, a tiny sleeping quarters with thin, uncomfortable mattresses, as well as a single bunk bed, and a storage room filled with supplies Father had gathered over the years. There were no windows, and the heavy reinforced door was the only connection to the outside world through underground tunnels. The feeling was all too familiar. The sensation of drowning, suffocating, knowing my time could be up. Jack couldn't stand still, tapping a bead on the ground. Elsa and Cal were frozen, their expressions hard to read. I had never thought about what it would be like to be eaten. I used to try and put myself in a chicken's shoes. Father had a laptop we were allowed supervised access to. No internet, but a whole database filled with his own research on this phenomenon. He compared us to chickens, living things with thoughts and memories and families, dragged from their homes and killed for food. Just like kids, adults didn't need chicken meat to survive. They wanted it, craved it like a drug. Father held out the playing cards with a reassuring smile that I didn't believe. He wasn't smiling to make us feel better. Father was smiling because he was hungry. "All right, everyone, let's play." Father's expression made me nauseous. His tone was enough to make us stand up. Jack jumped up first. He was visibly trembling. When Elsa and Cal didn't move, he pulled them to their feet too. It hit me when Father was shuffling the cards, playfully nudging a petrified Jack with his shoulder. He never meant to save us. If anything, he only kept us alive so he wouldn't be lonely. The six of us stood in suffocating silence, fear palpable on our faces, the type I can't even describe. How can I possibly put that kind of feeling into words? The existential dread of what comes after death and the terror of being eaten. The whirlwind of endless what-ifs and could-have-beens. I could have grown up in a world where I went to school and graduated. I could have had loving parents who supported me. I could have turned 20 years old and asked Ren to senior prom and then to marry me. Something warm slithered its way up my throat. I could have escaped 2 years ago with Ren when he begged me to go with him. Vivi. Father's voice snapped me out of it, and I was suddenly all too aware that I was wearing my dead best friend's jacket. I could feel my skin crawling, phantom bugs filling my mouth. Ren wanted to leave, and I told him we were safe with Father. But that was when there were more of us, and less of a chance of being chosen. I wanted to be selfish. I wanted to turn my head and pretend the real monster wasn't right in front of me. Father cleared his throat impatiently, and I squeezed my eyes shut, reached forward, and plucked a card from the flimsy stack. The rules of the drawing were simple, and yet I could barely think straight. All we had to do was not pull a joker. 6 cards, and among them, 1 joker. For the unlucky player, they had officially offered themselves as meat to Father. I was yet to look at my own card, squeezing it into my fist. I could hear our combined breaths, our screaming pleas to any god listening. Jack drew a queen, his face lighting up. He looked like he might say something before stepping back, clearing his throat. Elsa, visibly trembling, drew a 4 of hearts, her hands shaking. Cal hesitated for a moment, his brows furrowed in concentration, before drawing a 6 of hearts. Alia folded her arms, exhaled, and drew a king. Phoebe, who looked like she was about to throw up, pulled a jack. Squeezing my card in my palm, I couldn't breathe. The others were staring at me, and I knew what they were thinking. 6 cards, 6 players, 1 joker. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in my home. I was imprisoned inside a slaughterhouse, and the walls were closing in. I remembered when Ren drew a joker and burst out laughing. He couldn't stop, even when I tried to calm him down, tried to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything was going to be okay. I felt his tears soaking my shoulder and his sobs rattling his chest, his lips grazing my ear, telling me things that never fully registered. We should have ran. His voice dripped with disdain that only truly hit me when I was in his place. Ren didn't smile at me when he died. He never forgave me. Why didn't we run? I couldn't understand why he was laughing. Why, despite his hollowed-out eyes, he was smiling like he'd won the game. But drawing that joker myself, I felt it, hysterics creeping up my throat. I laughed. It felt wrong, hollow, and alien, but also good. The concept of being eaten alive was suddenly so ridiculous that I was on my knees, howling into my arms, my body trembling with laughter I couldn't control. I tried to stop, tried to stifle my giggles with one hand clamped over my mouth, but it kept coming, slamming into me in waves of revulsion. I thought Ren was possessed by the Joker card, but now I understood it. I finally understood the feeling of complete despair washing over him. When I stopped laughing, I had already made my decision. I was going to die with a smile on my face, just like Ren. The others were frowning at me, mixed looks on their faces. "I'm sorry, Vivi," Jack whispered. His expression, however, said, "Sorry it's you and not me." Alia and Phoebe stepped back, as if I was suddenly contagious. Cal offered me a small smile, and that was enough. I'm glad it wasn't pitiful. It was just a smile. With the Joker in my hand, I readied myself to die. But there's a difference between being brave and being a coward. Between Ren Samuels and me. I watched him die with his head held high, and I was sure, in that disorienting moment of post-reality, that I could follow in his footsteps. However, my eyes were wandering, and my palms were growing clammy. Father was in the corner preparing his blade, and knowing that it would slice through my flesh and turn me into salty chicken, something in me snapped. I was a coward. I wasn't brave like Ren or Becca or Thomas and Jonas. I was a fucking coward, and I wasn't going to die. The world felt like it jumped into fast forward. I was aware I was twisting around, and it took 2 single breaths, one to get me to the door, and another when I was twisting the handle and yanking it open. The hunt began as soon as I catapulted myself from what I thought was home. There was never a hunt with the others. They gave themselves up. Cowards, however. They were free game. Throwing myself into a sprint, my mind spinning, I was aware that the others were already on my tail. The rules were simple, just like the card game. Cowards were caught, dragged back, and skinned alive. I had already made my decision, and going back to the bunker was suicide. Father was very strict with his rules. We were not supposed to leave the bunker. Adults and reformed kids brainwashed into bounty hunters plagued the underground tunnels, searching for threads. When I managed to get into the tunnels, however, throwing myself through the dark, ankle-deep in sewage, there was no sign of hunters. "Vivi!" Jack's voice echoed, almost startling me into place. "Vivi, come back. It's not safe." Jack's hesitant strides came to a halt. I could sense his fear of that single sliver of natural light leaking from above ground. Catching a glimpse of silver in the pitch black, I blindly reached out my hands. Ren's voice was in my head. "I've seen them. When I was on lookout with Jonas, we saw a ladder, Vivi. We can climb up and get out of here." He sounded so hopeful, and I had a sobering moment of vulnerability that threatened to send me to my knees. Grasping hold of the ladder, I lifted myself up, clawing my way toward the light. Light that was getting brighter, not the kind I was told about. Father said the sky was polluted bright red. He said the sun rose, but it was blocked out, casting an eerie red glow. When the world fell apart, nuclear power plants across the planet went into meltdown, and nobody could stop them. When I climbed through the metal grating, however, drinking in the sun's glare, sitting in a perfect, crystalline blue sky, Father's words were suddenly obsolete. The world was not as empty as I initially thought. It was bright, colorful. Something flew past me, choking fumes filling my nose, a throaty yell following. "Kid, what the fuck are you doing in the middle of the road?" Adult. I ducked back into the ground, my body seizing up. The adult's words barely registered in my mind. He was right. I was kneeling in the middle of a main road filled with traffic, with cars. Father told us vehicles had been taken out by an electromagnetic pulse. "Hey, are you good?" Another voice. This time it was softer. The guy hovering over me was a teenager, maybe a year younger than me. He was a thread, but he didn't look like one. The boy's outfit took me off guard. A white shirt and jeans, a leather jacket flung over the top. His hair wasn't like the boys in the bunker. It was vibrant red and styled and floppy, hanging over friendly brown eyes. In his hand was a rectangular device. Cell phone. Father told us phones were used as currency in the New World. This guy didn't look like a kid who was being hunted down, struggling to survive. He looked like a normal college boy. His eyes were bright, devoid of the hollow, cavernous look I was so used to seeing in others. Even Ren, with his wide smile, failed to hide his true feelings with his eyes. For a moment, I was disoriented by the sudden loud beeps around me and the baking sun on the back of my neck. The sun was supposed to be choked with pollution. The clouds were supposed to be a fairy tale. Turning my attention back to the stranger, I noticed one glaring detail. This kid wasn't malnourished like Jack and Ren. He was eating well. He was alive. Seeing people living their day-to-day lives and not suffering, it filled me with happiness. And then despair, when I could taste my best friend in my mouth. He was so salty. All at once, my body felt like it was crumbling. I was too aware of the world around me. Gritty concrete scraping my palms and a cool breeze grazing my face. My stomach heaved, and I choked on Ren again. I think I was fucking screaming, my chest heaving with hysterical sobs, but I couldn't feel or hear anything. Couldn't even taste Ren as he dripped down my chin. I barely noticed the boy pulling me into his car, his voice a blur of panic. "Fuck, are you okay? Did you just crawl out of the ground?" "Oh fuck, oh god, okay, this is bad. Let me take you to the emergency room." When someone across the road shouted if I was okay, I let myself fragment. Father had fed me so many lies designed to keep us submissive. The sky wasn't red. My generation wasn't being hunted down. Adults weren't monsters, and I was safe. Above ground, I was safe. He kept me from the surface with those lies. Ren had died for nothing. Pressed against the cool leather of the car seat, curled into myself, I struggled to breathe. When we started to move, reality hit me in convulsive lightning bolts. The world, according to Father, was of his own creation. "So, what's your name?" the boy asked casually. "Do you sit in the middle of the road often, or is that like a TikTok thing?" The stranger tapped the steering wheel, clearly eager to ask more, but sticking to basics. I couldn't respond, my tongue twisted and wrong. I pressed my face against the window and watched life continue outside. I saw a mother with her baby, and tears pricked my eyes. The boy fiddled with his phone, and a song began to play through the speakers. I liked it. The rhythmic beat pulsed through my skull, pushing away my dark thoughts. Under the late afternoon sun, I finally took in the boy's face. He had freckles, just like Ren. "Do you, need me to take you home or something?" He cleared his throat. "Or maybe the sheriff's office?" I noticed his side eye, his gaze lingering on the ragged remains of my clothes. Instead of commenting on the deep red stains on my shirt, he handed me a can. Soda. Real soda. A luxury in the bunker. I had only tasted lukewarm Diet Coke. I drank it down quickly. It was fruity, perfect, and refreshing. The guy laughed. "Geez, don't drink it that fast." I found my voice. "Sorry." "No, you don't have to apologize." The boy sighed. "Where do you live? If you want, I can take you home. I'm Jordan, by the way." "Vivi." His smile was warm, though the more I was looking at him, I could see that eerie blue light striking across his jawline. "Vivi. Ooh, nice name. Like Nefertari Vivi." He shook his head when I didn't reply, his expression sheepish. "Please tell me you get the reference." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't cry. Father had lied about everything. Relief washed over me, warm and real. I didn't have to die. My eyes flickered, my head bouncing against the glass of the window. Outside, the streets were bustling. There were kids everywhere, and my heart was singing. I was watching a little kid run across the road with his parents when we drove past what I figured was a high school. Empty. The windows had been blown through, garbage covering the campus. Further down the road, however, another high school came into view. There they were, this time visible through looming metal gates. Kids. "Hey, can I talk to Blue?" Jordan's murmur brought me back to reality. "Sir." He sighed. "Yes, I've got one of them." He leaned back in his chair, his seat squeaking. "Yeah, no, I'm not fucking stupid. 500. He turned his head, and I noticed the blue light attached to his ear flashing. 500, and you tell me where my brother is. We had a deal." I caught movement, his head tipping back. "No, tell me where Ryan is, and it's yours. The 500 means nothing to me, asshole." I think I fell asleep, my head still awkwardly pressed against the pane. When I woke up, Jordan was being yelled at. He was also doing some of the yelling. "Oh, come on, I wasn't even going that fast." The sun was gone, late afternoon bleeding into twilight. I had never seen the night sky. I had never seen stars or the sliver of the moon visible over the horizon. There was a figure outside the window, illuminated in floodlights, an adult. I felt myself stiffen up before remembering adults weren't hunting us down. Father was. I was very clear, Jordan. The woman's voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "If I caught you speeding again, I would report you." "Yes, Miss Carter." The boy's tone dripped with sarcasm. "I'm aware I was maybe possibly definitely speeding, but as you can see," he gestured to me with flailing hands. "This girl is clearly distressed, and I'm taking her to the sheriff's office." Jordan pulled out a piece of paper from under his seat. "I have a license right here. I can see that." He whistled. "All right, well, I'll be on my way. Mr. Redbird, if you so much as touch that steering wheel, I will report you." "But..." The woman cleared her throat. "I can take it from here." Jordan's eyes darkened significantly, his smile strained. I said, "I've got it." "Jordan, would you like me to contact your employer?" His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "I'm one of their best, so no. Hand over the girl, and I won't say a word about your speeding." The boy scoffed, and I saw a whole other side to him. He reached out reluctantly, opening my door. "She's all yours." To my surprise, he didn't move or speak when the woman gently grasped my arm. I was gently coaxed from the seat, and the door slammed shut. She wasn't finished grilling him. "Are you chewing, Jordan?" He shrugged. "What? I can't chew and drive." The woman didn't reply, and he exhaled out an exaggerated sigh, opened his mouth, and pulled out the piece of gum. To my confusion, the lady plucked it from his fingers with a handkerchief. "Thank you." He rolled his eyes. "You're welcome. Have fun." A loud bang coming from the back startled me. Miss Carter shot the boy an accusatory glare. "Car trouble, Mr. Redbird?" Jordan glanced at me, a smile tugging at his lips, as another unmistakable bang echoed from the back, this time louder. Yep. Car trouble, ma'am." His smile had too many teeth. "Have a great night." With a two-fingered salute, he drove off, leaving me with a face full of exhaust fumes. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a comfy chair in the sheriff's office, a towel wrapped around me. Miss Carter sat in front of me, the glare from her laptop screen bathing heavy-looking sleep circles. She told me to tell her everything, and when I did, spluttering out my whole life story, the woman paused to hand me a tissue. I didn't realize I was crying, swiping at my nose. Miss Carter was very helpful. She offered me drinks and some microwave noodles. According to her, my age placed me on the threshold of an adult in town. While they were tracking down my parents, I was offered a place at a boarding house for grown-up orphans. I was halfway through telling her about Ren when she asked for my tissue. I handed it over, and she offered a fresh one before jumping to her feet. Miss Carter's smile was kind. I wasn't used to kind. "I'm just going to process your details in the system," she said. "I'll be right back." Her words twisted my gut. That's what my mom said before Father took me from her. Mrs. Carter, she told me to call her Linda, was gone for a while. Her office was cozy, and slumped in my spinning chair, I was tempted to sleep. She left me with a laptop to play with, so the first thing I did was check out the internet. There was no disaster, and just like our town, the world continued on as normal. I was looking through online news articles when I started to feel nauseous. I wasn't used to normal food. In my search for the bathroom, I found another office. I could see Linda through the window. She had something pressed to her face, and I wondered if she had a nosebleed. But then I saw the creases in the tissue paper, and the realization started to hit me. It was my tissue paper, the one I swiped at my nose and mouth with. I could feel myself slowly moving back when the woman's eyes rolled to pearly whites, her lips parting. The way she moved in erratic jolts sent barf erupting into the back of my mouth. Linda was trembling, slamming the tissue against her nose and mouth, inhaling it like a drug. Inhaling me like a drug, just like Father said. He said we were like a black market drug to them. I only caught a hold of myself when she dropped the tissue, her hand slipping into her jeans pocket and pulling something out. Jordan's used gum. It was sticky, wrapped around her pinched fingers. When Linda dropped it into her own mouth, I remembered how to run. When her mouth opened, wider and wider and wider, I was already out of the door. Twisting around, I no longer saw a human inside the room. Instead, a void-like mouth expanding, inky black darkness chasing after me. I got out of there and ran, straight into Jordan. He didn't look fazed by my expression. "Let me guess," he said. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded. I had zero idea how he'd just casually walked into a sheriff's office. Jordan inclined his head, and there it was. That haunted, empty cavern in his eyes, the eyes of a thread. "Miss Carter just tried to eat you, didn't she?" In my panic, I tried to get past him, only for him to sidestep in front of me. "I can help you," he said. "I was trying to help you earlier, but you were kidnapped." Before I could speak, his expression darkened significantly. "You can either come with me or become a main course." His gaze flicked to my blood-stained shirt. "Your choice." I think I was going to go with Jordan, but then I remembered the banging in his truck, that blue light attached to his ear. I couldn't trust it. Shoving past him, I ran until I couldn't breathe. Over the last few days, I've been in hiding. I swiped a phone from an adult, and thankfully, it has the internet. The same car passes every day and night, and I know it's Jordan. But he's a thread. Why would he hunt down other threads? I can't stop fucking shaking. Father lied to me about everything, but I don't think he was lying about the town. The outside world is normal, clearly. But New Haven is something else entirely. I think the adults here are just like him, or even worse. So, if you are a kid in New Haven, please help me. The adults in my town are monsters with human faces. If you are an adult, I have a gun, and I will shoot you. Please don't hurt me.